There's a certain breed of father in fairy tales, the kind who'd trade his daughter for a sack of gold and a pat on the back. Our Miller was precisely this sort. When a wealthy suitor with eyes like whetstones and pockets full of promises came calling, the Miller didn't ask his daughter's opinion. He simply smiled, shook the man's hand, and served her future up like Sunday supper. The daughter, wise beyond her years and suspicious by nature, felt her stomach drop. Not the butterflies of young love, mind you, but the cold dread of a rabbit who smells the fox before it sees the den. The suitor insisted she visit his house deep in the forest, alone at twilight, because nothing says trustworthy husband material like making a girl tramp through wolf-infested woods. She walked the needle-thin path with her shawl pulled tight, each step crunching like bones underfoot. The trees leaned in, whispering gossip in languages older than sin. She should have turned back. She knew she should have turned back. But promises are heavy things, and father's expectations heavier still, so she pressed on into the gathering dark where the light goes to die. That's when she saw it. A bird perched upon a juniper branch. Its feathers stained the rusty brown of dried blood, its eyes bright and terrible. It didn't sing, it screamed. Turn back, thou bonny bride. Turn back, or you will be fried. Now, most birds content themselves with worms and territorial squabbles, but this creature had seen things. Its warning dripped with genuine panic, and when a bird with blood on its breast tells you to run, you run. But our bride stood frozen, caught between the terror behind and the terror she suspected lay ahead. The house revealed itself like a bad tooth in a pretty mouth, half sunk into the earth, windows glowing with a sickly yellow light that attracted moths and madness. It wore ivy like a shroud. No smoke rose from the chimney, yet warmth seeped from within, the wrong kind of warmth, the warmth of a kitchen where meat is prepared. The door stood ajar, inviting as a wound. She pushed it open, and the hinges sang a note that sounded suspiciously like a scream. Inside, the air tasted of copper and cloves. In the kitchen sat an old woman, ancient as the forest itself, her face a road map of sorrows, her fingers twisted like grapevines. She stirred a pot that smelled of sleeping draught and secrets. When she saw the girl, her eyes widened, not with malice, but with the desperate hope of someone who has waited too long for a chance at redemption. Child, she croaked, do you know what oven this is? Do you know who sharpens the knives here? The girl shook her head, though her blood already knew the answer, thrumming frozen in her veins. The old woman leaned close, her breath smelling of bitter herbs and regret. Your betrothed is a robber, a murderer, a cannibal with a taste for tender things. His band arrives at midnight, and they will sup upon you, my dear, unless you hide. She pointed a gnarled finger toward a great barrel standing in the corner, wide as a well, dark as a grave. The girl didn't ask questions. Wisdom is knowing when curiosity will get you killed. She scrambled behind the barrel, pressing herself into the shadows like a spider into its crevice, heart hammering a frantic Morse code against her ribs. They came with the moon, riding shadows instead of horses, carrying the stink of the road and spilled blood. The bridegroom led them, his handsome face a mask he wore poorly, slipping to reveal the wolf beneath. They were merry in that terrible way that men have when they know violence is coming, laughing too loud, eyes too bright. A feast tonight, brothers. The bridegroom called out, and the walls seemed to absorb the sound, hungry for it. The old woman bowed and scraped, playing her part, while the girl behind the barrel stopped breathing. They dragged her in, a maiden no older than the bride herself, eyes wide with the particular horror of one who understands her role in this theater of blood. She was beautiful, which only made it worse, like seeing a porcelain doll smashed deliberately. She begged, of course. They all beg. But the robbers only laughed and forced her to sit at the table of honor. Drink, they commanded, pouring wine darker than sin into a goblet. Drink to your health while you still have it. The girl behind the barrel watched through a crack, helpless as a ghost. They made her drink until her heart burst, though burst is such a clean word for what happened. The wine wasn't merely wine, it was laced with something that made her veins stand out like blue rivers, that made her heart hammer against her ribs like a bird in a cage until the cage broke. She gasped, clutched her chest, and fell forward onto the table, her hair spreading like dark water. The robbers cheered as if they'd won a prize, and perhaps they had. The bride behind the barrel felt tears hot as acid on her cheeks, but she dared not make a sound, not even to weep. Then came the butchery, performed with the casual efficiency of men who have done this many times before. They tore her clothes away like wrapping paper, revealing the pale geography of her body. They chopped her upon the table, the same table where bread is broken, severing joints with wet thunks that echoed in the rafters. They salted the pieces, great handfuls of white crystals thrown onto red meat, preserving her for future suppers. The bridegroom worked alongside them, his sleeves rolled up, his smile gentle as a midwife's, which somehow made it the most monstrous thing of all. In the violence, a finger flew through the air, severed cleanly, adorned with a golden ring that caught the firelight and spun like a tiny planet. It sailed over the barrel, over the heads of the feasting monsters, and landed with a soft thump in the hiding bride's lap. She looked down at it, this small piece of someone else's ending, and felt the weight of it settle into her soul. The finger was still warm, the ring was heavy. She tucked it into her bodice, not as theft, but as evidence, as proof that nightmares leave fingerprints. When the feasting paused, the old woman emerged with her pot, steam rising in hypnotic spirals. "Drink, masters," she cooed. "Drink deep and sleep deep, for tomorrow brings more sport." They drank, the fools, guzzling the drugged wine, and one by one they toppled like trees in a storm, first the followers, then the bridegroom himself, collapsing face first into the remains of their meal. Snores filled the room, wet and ugly. The old woman didn't waste a moment. She grabbed the bride's hand, pulling her from her hiding place, her grip surprisingly strong for one so withered. "Run," the old woman commanded, "and never look back. The path is clear until dawn." She shoved a loaf of bread and a flask into the bride's trembling hands. "Take these, and my blessing, though blessings are thin currency in these woods." The bride fled through the door, past the juniper tree where the blood-stained bird now slept, through the forest that seemed to part before her like a curtain. She ran until her lungs burned and her feet bled, until the sun cracked the eastern sky like a golden egg, and she collapsed into her father's mill, safe but forever changed. Days passed, or perhaps years. Time moves differently when you've looked into the abyss and it has winked back. The bride said nothing of her ordeal, keeping the finger wrapped in silk beneath her pillow like a terrible secret. The wedding date approached, the miller rubbing his hands with glee, the bridegroom playing the part of the ardent lover, all smiles and soft words. But our bride had a plan, cooking slow and careful as poison in a teapot. She would not refuse him publicly. That would only warn him. No, she would invite him to his own destruction and serve it to him like a wedding cake. The day arrived, decked in flowers and lies. The great hall filled with guests, neighbors, relatives, all the village worthies who love a good wedding and a better scandal. The bride sat at the head table, radiant in white, the finger with its golden ring heavy in her pocket. The bridegroom sat beside her, handsome as a devil in church, whispering sweet nothings that now sounded like threats. When the wine was poured and the toast begun, the bride stood, raising her hand for silence. "Before I wed," she said, her voice clear as a bell, "I must tell you of a dream I had." She told them everything. The forest house, the old woman, the barrel the maiden forced to drink until her heart burst, the chopping, the salting, the finger flying through the air to land in her lap. She spoke with the dreamy detachment of one recounting sleep visions, but her eyes were sharp as scalpels. The guests laughed nervously at first, then fell silent as the details grew too specific, too visceral. The bridegroom's smile remained fixed, but his knuckles whitened around his goblet. "Only a dream," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "Only a fancy." The bride smiled then, the first true smile she'd worn in days. "Ah," she said, "but dreams leave tokens." She reached into her bodice and withdrew the finger, the golden ring glinting in the torchlight. She placed it on the table before her, where it stood upright like a gruesome candle, accusing in its silence. The room erupted in screams and gasps. The bridegroom turned the color of old cheese, his handsome mask slipping entirely to reveal the snarling beast beneath. "Witch!" he shrieked, but the finger spoke louder than his denials. The guests recognized the ring. It had belonged to the miller's daughter's cousin, missing these 3 months. The proof was small, but it was absolute. They took him there, in his wedding clothes, still wearing the corsage of lies. His band was rounded up from the forest den, dragged blinking into the light. The execution was swift and thorough, the kind of justice that doesn't bother with trials when the evidence is literally pointing at you. They died as they had lived, violently. As for our bride, she kept the ring, had it melted down and forged into a key which she wore around her neck forever after. A reminder that the darkest forests hold the brightest truths, and that sometimes the only way to catch a monster is to agree to walk into his den. She never married, of course, but she lived.